All right, we'll get going now. Anybody that joins later will have to catch up, but there's obviously a recording for this, so we'll send it out after the webinar. Hello, everybody. My name is Britton Langdon. Welcome to our webinar. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer here at Snaptrude, and Snaptrude is a cloud-based collaborative design authoring software for early stage conceptual design. And today I have with me our product marketer, Archit Avasti, and with us is our guest, Danielle Hermann, who is a principal at OPN Architects and was the lead architect on the Krause Gateway Center, which is the project we'll be talking about today. So before we jump in, there is a Q&A portion of this where if you want to ask questions as we go, feel free. This is going to be very relaxed, sort of go with the flow type webinar. So feel free to ask any questions that you might have in the Q&A portion. I think that's on the little ribbon of Zoom, and we'll answer them as we go. And then if there's time at the end, maybe we'll collect answer or questions and go through them as well then. So Danielle, if you wouldn't mind, could you sort of introduce yourself a little bit more and kick this off by telling us a little high-level overview of the project?
Absolutely. Well, first, thank you for having me on the webinar. This is going to be a lot of fun. My name is Danielle Hermann. I'm a principal at OPN Architects. I help lead our Des Moines studio. For those out there who aren't maybe familiar with OPN, we're a Midwest firm. We have 5 locations, all in the kind of upper Midwest area. So 3 of our locations are here in Iowa, Des Moines, Iowa City, Cedar Rapids, and then we have a Madison, Wisconsin, and a Minneapolis, Minnesota studio. So we're about 110 to 120, depending on the given moment in time, architects and designers across those 5 locations. So and then for this project that we're going to be talking about, the Krause Gateway Center, this is a corporate headquarters project. So this was a company, Krause, it owns a family of companies, several actually, both in the United States and overseas in Italy. But their biggest and primary company is Come and Go, that most people are familiar with. So this building was a chance for them to bring all of their companies under one umbrella, one building. So it was a multi-tenant headquarters facility. And they were also moving from the western suburbs of Des Moines to downtown into a site that completes kind of the western gateway area of downtown Des Moines. And when I refer to the Western Gateway, for anyone familiar with Des Moines planning, back in the late 80s and maybe very early 90s, Mario Gondolsonis created a plan for downtown Des Moines that included a Western and an Eastern Gateway. And this site literally was one of the last sites to complete that gateway and that planning strategy. So an important project both for the company, but also an important location for the entire city of Des Moines and kind of the urban strategy.
And obviously this project was a collaboration between OPN and Renzo Piano. Do you want to kind of talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. Yeah. So Renzo Piano Building Workshop was actually brought on before OPN. The Krause family and the commercial real estate group within their company did a nationwide and really a global search for architects. The process was pretty extensive. They had day-long interviews, spent some time with their kind of 8 to 10 top architects, but ultimately ended up choosing RPBW as their architect, their design architect. They then simultaneously held a separate round of selections for a local architect of record, as well as a construction management company. This was going to be construction manager at risk. So we were interviewing at the same time as our construction partners were, and were selected almost simultaneously. But the interview process actually, in addition to just interviewing with the client, we interviewed with Renzo's office. And even early on, they referred to needing to have sort of a symbiotic relationship, and they referred to the interview process as dating or courting, because we were really looking to get married to complete a project like this together. Historically, their projects tend to span quite a bit of time, and they build deep relationships, which was no different here. So it was a fun process to go through.
Yeah, I imagine when we talked previously, you told some pretty great stories about that process of selection and getting to know with the Krause family, getting to know Renzo Piano and their work that they've done. Can you talk a little bit about sort of how your client, the Krause family, really kind of drove that relationship and you talked about sort of dating early on, but I mean, you were doing some heavy dating, you're traveling together. Well,
Yeah.
tell us about that.
Yeah, yeah. One of the probably most unique parts of the process in this project was that with Renzo's work around the world and the projects that they had completed being a big part of the influencers or driving design, we had the opportunity to go visit their prior completed work, and in one instance, we actually went to a project that at that time was ongoing under construction in Athens, Greece, for their new performance hall and opera. And so we were able to talk directly with the builders who were midstream about some of the details of how it was coming together, how they were completing the work. And we actually had our construction management team and our contractors with us on that trip. So again, this was, construction folks talking to construction folks, architects talking to architects about how things were going, and some lessons learned, some things that they had changed along the way to do differently. And the client at the same time hearing all of this and seeing firsthand why certain design decisions were important or why certain details were so fundamental to the project. So it was a really collaborative process. It was a chance for us to see or get a little bit of a line of sight into the future of what the project would look like for us when we were going through construction, which included a lot of mock-ups. Everything on Renzo Piano Building Workshop projects is custom designed, unlike a lot of our projects where you may have, your one or two kind of custom moments. Everything on their projects is custom designed. There's really nothing off the shelf. So part of executing that to the highest level is creating mock-ups throughout the construction process that both give the contractor a chance to build it and sort of practice, but also then for the design team to look at what the outcomes are and maybe tweak either expectations or even in some cases the approach to what we were designing to make sure that we were getting the correct end product and one that everybody was going to be happy with in the final building.
So, obviously that has the mock-up, the additional mock-ups, or I should say, as you said, the building is largely unique instead of just having one or two unique pieces. How did that change your approach or OPN's approach on a project like this versus, maybe the projects before this?
Yeah, another, you were referencing the relationship earlier, but I think that was a huge part of the approach to something like this. Unlike a typical design architect of record, sort of formula or process that probably most people are familiar with, where the design architect is most heavily involved early on, and then there's kind of a handoff that everybody stays involved, but the architect of record sort of picks it up and moves forward. In our case, we really had a team of people that were built and we stayed with the project, all of us throughout, simultaneously running side by side. So the collaboration was extensive throughout every single phase of the project. Nobody really either went away or came in after the fact. We both sort of built our teams up during the construction documents phase, but worked hand in hand throughout. So that was part of the approach. When you're doing something this custom, you have to have all of the right people at the table throughout in order to make sure that you're, both fulfilling the vision, but executing it the way it needs to be done.
It makes a lot of sense. And coming from the construction side, I know obviously about collaboration, but I can't imagine having to do that so early in the design process, especially when, design is such a personal effort, and having to collaborate with a team who's doing one aspect versus another aspect. It's got to be a difficult thing to do. And we're going to get into more of that here in just a minute. But before I turn it over to you, Archit, Danielle, is there anything on these photos you want to talk about before we start sort of looking at this in Snaptrude and jumping into sort of your process through the conceptual design all the way through the rest of the process?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about sort of the program of the building, but for those watching, if they're not familiar, the building is 6 stories. So you'll see more about how that kind of comes together and how the program lays out throughout. But it's about 160,000 square feet, and it does have 2 levels of below grade parking that you really don't see anywhere. We did a pretty good job of even hiding the entrance to that parking ramp, so it's pretty quiet on the site. But and then the other thing that shows up in some of the imagery, but that was really influential, and we'll talk about more as we get into the site, is that again, this location on the Western Gateway is right across from the John and Mary Papajohn Sculpture Park that runs through the city of Des Moines. So the influence of both the urban environment and art in particular, both to the owner, Kyle, but because of the site location and that integration, all of those things were major drivers for both design thinking, but also the vision that the client had for what the project needed to be. So hopefully that gives just a little bit more base and context as we go through some additional discussion.
Absolutely. All right, I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to you, Archit. Uh, Before he jumps into how amazing we did for a design process of trying to replicate this and create an homage, I do have to say, obviously, this project was not designed in Snaptrude. This project was designed before Snaptrude even existed. So we're excited to be working with OPN as a customer today, but this project specifically was done long before any of us worked here. So I want to start with that. All right, Arjit, take it over and show us what you've got today, and then we'll walk
Mhm.
through the rest of the questions as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. So, hi guys, my name is Archit Avasthi. I'm just sharing my screen now. Please let me know if you can see it.
Yep.
And yeah, here we are. This is what we tried our best to replicate what Danielle and her fantastic team have done. This was, I mean, right off the bat, this model took about 11 hours to do in Snaptrude. And today, what we're going to do is focus on the earliest design stages of how you get your program briefs in, and then you start modeling a building like this. How do you go about doing your massing? And then finally, what can you do once you're done with your early conceptual design? And throughout this, we're going to understand some things about this project. Some of them we have discussed already, like the Papa John Sculpture Park over here, which you see is right across the street. And so I'm just going to let Britton and Danielle quickly discuss what what were the first responses when you looked at this as an empty site, since it's a heavily crowded or very dense kind of neighborhood. How did you kick this off?
Yeah, so the site, interestingly enough, it was, when we came to it, actually 2 separate sites. There was a road that was running diagonally through the site that was vacated so that this could be condensed into one building pad. So that was sort of step number one. Another just contextual issue that we had to deal with, we have Ingersoll Avenue running to the north and Grand Avenue running to the south. Grand Avenue is the view corridor to the Iowa State Capitol, and then Ingersoll Avenue runs sort of west and connects all the way out through the western portion of the city. And so this is this was sort of an important portion of the site or of the city, because there's a grid shift that happens and it happens at this site location. So that was an influencing factor as we thought about how the building wanted to address those different kind of contextual relationships of the city grid. And then the other thing was along Ingersoll Avenue, and then as we moved south across the site to Grand, there was an over 17-foot grade differential that we were also accommodating. So those kind of just initial parameters had a huge impact on not only what we could do, but then how we started to really think about setting or fitting a building on this site. Renzo's office, to their credit, their entire team does a phenomenal job of diving really deeply into and understanding all of those contextual elements. So right away, they recognized how important those influencers were going to be, but they also wanted to invite the community in. And so we did a community visioning session where we invited all of the neighbors around the site. So that's another corporate headquarters to the east, a hospital system to the north, and then one of Des Moines' most historic neighborhoods to the kind of northwest corner there, and then another corporate entity, Meredith Publications, is also kind of right sort of to the south west of the site. So we had all of those entities in a room with us, along with city leadership, and we started to ask questions about what was important to them about the site, what would make this make us good neighbors for that. And Renzo's team, again, did a phenomenal job around listening to what was important about this site, and that really drove their response as well when they were designing. So porosity and how people flowed through this site, knowing that there was a neighborhood, and there's a bike trail that also runs along 15th Street that's just directly to the west. So everywhere around this building, there are ways to navigate up and around and through the site, and even up and around and through the building across levels 1 and 2, where there were public access points to lobbies at those 2 levels that navigated that grade differential. So the other big driver then was that the sculpture park is a big lawn with beautiful pieces of artwork sitting in it. The response here, and the Krause family, Kyle, has a huge art collection and a love of art, but they wanted this to complement, not repeat, what was happening in the sculpture park. So we worked with Confluence Landscape Architecture, who did a great job, again, also sort of blending and melding with the entire team through the design process to come up with this strategy of creating this more forested site. So it would complement the sculpture park by creating these moments with dense trees, meandering pathways, shade, moments of shade, and more park-like areas that could still have art integrated, still complement these plazas and amphitheaters that would just create these different environments, something that the sculpture park didn't have. And Kyle always spoke about this project and how he was thinking about this site and the design as sort of a gift back to the city of Des Moines. So allowing and inviting the public onto the site was a huge part of the design intent as well.
That's amazing.
You know, yeah, with all of that having to play together with the constraints around, wanting to highlight the Papa John sculpture park, but not replicate it. Be amazing, but don't do that. And just like anything else, it's incredible that you guys worked as a team to come up with this. And you talk about porosity, as you can see right here. I mean, the building is amazing in the way you did that. You talked about this last time we spoke, but were there any challenges outside the ones you obviously mentioned from a early set of expectations by the client? Were there any challenges to starting this project that you guys faced that you're proud you overcame?
One of the big challenges was how to fit 160,000 square foot of program on this site, knowing how important the open space, the green spaces on the site were, and how to try to maintain that. So using that height difference that existed on the site and sort of having a very light footprint, the part of the building that touches the ground is really only about 25% of the site. So everything that kind of comes up after that off the building, it is what develops into those large overhangs. Renzo always spoke about from early on, and for anybody who's familiar with Renzo's work, there's always a great sketch, that initial sketch that drives everything. He always drew these 5 planes and how they stretched and floated across the site. So again, that kind of intuitive understanding of setting the building lightly on the site to maintain all of those spaces, but then using these deep planes and overhangs to be able to kind of stack up the building program to give us the space that we needed while not taking away from the green space and the plaza spaces on the site.
Awesome. All right, Archie, what are you doing
Mhm.
here?
Okay, so I'm just going to go back a step here. So I imported the site and just doing a general contextual study. And like Danielle mentioned, there are so many important structures over here. I just imported them on Snaptrude, and right now I'm just going to assign some colors to the ones that we want to mark out. And we kind of want to keep in mind, you can obviously see the sculpture park right in front here. But what I'm going to do right now is just quickly skip to the model where I've already colored all the important structures around. I'm going to continue over there.
Mhm.
So yeah, so Danielle, this one over here, this is the building you were talking about where we have the shift in the grid, the city grid.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And yeah.
you can see it pretty clearly in kind of the wedge shape of the site itself. And that in and of itself was a design driver too. Once you start building up the program, I think people will quickly see that Renzo and his team chose to have the building address Grand Avenue as the primary sort of front door of the building. So the floors, the top or the first 4 floors address that and hold that urban edge where the overhang sort of stretches and reaches out towards Grand Avenue. And then when we got up to the 5th floor, the floor plate shifts to address the shift in the city grid. And so it looks directly down Ingersoll Avenue and out to the west. And then the pavilion, the green roof pavilion on 6th floor sits at that same angle. So that's what that then creates what the dynamic shape that everybody sees. It's kind of the signature of the building and how it sits on there was directly a response to how the city sort of is built around the site and how it sits on the site.
Mhm. So just to kind of go back and try to model that in the first initial stage of massing, what I'm trying to do here right now, you just saw me set our snap angle to 16 degrees, which is essentially the shift between the east-west and the north-south axis, right? And we obviously, when we start this project, when you would have started it, you would have known that you needed to meet a total carpet area of about 150,000 square feet. And we also, if we think about a 6-story structure, then one floor would be like, if I were to just do a very crude massing over here, about 155 by 155 feet of a square, right? And if I now go to 3D and just kind of change story height to 15 feet. And these are just rough figures right now. I'm just quickly trying to see what we can get here. I'm also going to keep the areas chart open. So I set a built up area, show targets. And I'm going to set target FAR as 1. And so we're just going to quickly get to about 150,000, like this, a 6-story structure. And then like you were saying, I think one of the earliest concepts was to have this as a floating structure, right? Where the ground, the first 2 floors essentially become like an inviting kind of cavity inside this urban fabric. And then the ones above just kind of float over to give a lot more shaded space and obviously usable interior space. Is that right?
That's correct.
Uh-huh.
And Danielle, you guys were obviously at OPN heavily focused on the programmatic side and how the spaces were going to play around with each other. As Archit is doing this, can you talk a little bit about sort of the interior of the building and you know, what did the Krause family want with the nature of the multiple companies that are going to be in there? How did that play into the design?
Yeah, that's a great question. So part of the reason that the sort of marriage of RPBW and OPN, I think, worked so well, especially for this particular project, was that Kyle Krause and the Krause group were looking for a building that would be iconic, that would be a 100+ year building. And they talked about it often as a legacy building. And because of Kyle's extensive art collection, it inherently had an aspect to it of sort of this museum-like context that Renzo Piano has done buildings like all over the world. OPN, as the sort of complement to that, we do a tremendous amount of corporate headquarters work and workplace strategy. So the marriage of our two teams was really to bring together the expertise of Renzo Piano being able to do this beautiful icon of a building that functioned like an art gallery, and for OPN to make a very functional multi-tenant kind of corporate headquarters space and integrate a new way for them to operate, a new kind of workplace strategy, all bringing all that together. So we were charged with the interior, the programmatic elements, and helping put together that new strategy along with change management for the teams that were moving into the building. And so that a lot of times we get asked the question, is this a corporate headquarters that functions like an art gallery, or is this really more of an art gallery that has a corporate headquarters built into it? The fact that people have to ask because you kind of can't tell is actually great. That means we succeeded, I think, because it has a feeling of being both at once.
Absolutely. Archie, what do you want to say here? You want to go forward with this, or do you want me to ask another question?
No, so yeah, I just wanted to kind of stress on what we're about to do right now. So here we have these 6 floors, and we are basically just about meeting the 150,000 square feet and our FAR limit. So as we can all see here, this kind of massing directly responds to the main grid on the north and south of the site, to the Papa John Square, the Sculpture Park. But one of the most interesting features here, which I want to point out right now, is that the 5th floor, I'm going to take it by the corner here, this actually is rotated in a way that it responds to the rest of that city grid. So one sec. 16 degrees, right? So that actually responds to the adjacent building here and the east and west axes. So Danielle, would you like to just talk about why that is so, and how that idea just came about of rotating that one floor?
Yeah, I mean, that really was the one of the drivers. And as we thought about stacking up these programs again, and because this building was intended to be a 100-year building, we were looking at how to program it for the long term. So it's built to actually house about 800 people maximum over the course of its lifespan. But on day one, we were only moving in about 325. So the entire 3rd floor is a shell space where 4th and 5th floors are their kind of open office environments, with 5th floor kind of being that rotated floor that also gave us the opportunity to create some outdoor spaces. So that's where we have a very large outdoor terrace. And again, because of that grid shift, we were able to have that terrace have a wonderful view both to the south, to the river, and to the west, looking down Ingersoll Avenue into the neighborhoods to that direction. And then on the 6th floor with our green roof, again, kind of same thing. The pavilion footprint is quite a bit smaller. That pavilion is a very unique space. It's really just a space that was built to be a respite. They use it for both meeting spaces, but it was set up for on a daily basis, people to be able to just go up there, either work quietly or even walk out onto the green roof, where we've got pathways that extend out into what was at that time, and I think still is, Iowa's only short grass prairie green roof. It's also built at that level for us to be able to anchor down additional sculptures, and we have points built into that green roof with benches already there, so that at some point when they install artwork, which we've looked at a couple pieces, but nothing's up there yet, so that can be kind of an additional art space for respite and relief. And that was, again, one of the very early and one of the first graphics actually that Renzo Piano's office created was the notion of, since we were going to be taking up this small area of green space on the site, was just pulling that green space directly up and recreating it on the 6th level. So we were essentially giving it right back to the users of the building.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Let's say that was the green roof.
Awesome.
Obviously with a with a focus on, satisfying Krause and their needs for an office, and all of the design constraints that were set out on the front of the project. How did you balance the functionality of the space with the aesthetics and the design? Was it a constant push and pull, or was it that you had a pretty good understanding from Renzo Piano what you wanted the aesthetics to be, and then it was a job of, making sure that you could fit the program in there? Or how did you balance that?
It was always a back and forth. And I think one of the things that worked well, and if others can learn from this or have kind of key takeaways, Renzo Piano's office did a great job of telling us what was most important. So we established right out of the gate, they helped establish sort of where the core needed to be and where they wanted it to be. Some major elements, there's an atrium that connects the floors, and then view corridors. So where they wanted to make sure that we protected views through the building. And so it created this framework that helped us establish some boundaries, some parameters that then we could work within to say, okay, well, what about this? And then we could talk about why, as a design team, programmatically and functionally, something might be important, but then how to balance that with the desired aesthetics. And then that's how we just kind of worked back and forth throughout the entire process, even into furniture selection and all of those pieces. It was always that kind of collaborative back and forth around trying to get the client the best possible end goal, meet all of their objectives, have it be functional, and then also have it be beautiful.
Makes sense. Awesome. Thank you. Archit, what's next?
Yeah. Next is just quickly going to talk about the overhangs that that Danielle just touched upon over here. So this is about a 20 feet cantilever in itself. But the overhangs actually extend to something like beyond this. So I'm just quickly, very roughly going to draw a slab here. And then we're going to do a quick sun study of it. Something like that. And let me just pull it up. Just one sec.
No problem. As he's doing this, Danielle, this was obviously, what was this completed? 2018? Is that what you said?
Yep, they moved in November, the beginning of November of 2018.
So the big push on sustainability and sustainable strategies was happening, but not. It was pretty early on to some degree, depending on who you are and where you live. What sort of strategies did this project have for you guys from a sustainability perspective? I believe, is it LEED certified?
It's actually LEED Gold. We were striving for, and maybe we were trying to set the client's expectations, but we had planned for and designed for LEED Silver. And Renzo came into a meeting one day and said, well, why wouldn't we just try to achieve LEED Gold? And we all looked around the table and thought, well, that might not be achievable, but we can sure give it a shot. And sure enough, we were able to do it. But so some of the major strategies are what Archit is modeling right now. The ability to have essentially a glass box of a building with a very high performing envelope. So we worked with a facade consultant out of New York, Front, to design and engineer all of our facade systems. And they're all a triple pane, high performing glass throughout the building. But then we also have these deep overhangs that shade. So everywhere in the building, we get this nice, even daylighting. We get views out of the building from over 97% of the spaces in the building. But we also have managed to control most of the glare and the heat gain that we would have had it not been for these deep overhangs on the building. So that was a huge strategy. Obviously, the green roof is one, but then the integration with the site, the working with the Metro public transportation system and adding a bus stop on the site, addressing the fact that we have the bike path and how pedestrians occupy the site. How we captured rainwater on the site and kept it out of the stormwater system. All of those were elements as well.
Now, this is in Des Moines. And for most people, they probably don't know, Des Moines is actually a very pedestrian-friendly city. Danielle and I both live in Iowa, so we're both obviously very familiar with this, with the area. But one thing about sustainability in Iowa is that it gets pretty cold in the winter, and this thing is made of a lot of glass. How did you guys handle the varying temperatures with this sort of design? And also the snow. I mean, there's a decent amount of snow here too.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think that the interesting thing for people to understand about Iowa and our climate region in general that maybe isn't intuitive if you don't live here is that we are still typically we're controlled by our need for cooling more than our need for heating when you have glass box buildings. That's because we also have very, very hot summers. So our peak loads just happen to occur for most of our buildings when you have a lot of glass in the summer. So the way that was balanced, again, the overhangs do a lot of our work for us. But then in the wintertime, that high performing triple pane IGU that's used throughout the building is what gets us the R value that we need to maintain all of our energy code and requirements and be able to actually exceed those in most places. We do also have some precast on the building around the cores, so it's not entirely all glass. But that's how we were able to handle it. And the building is very tight. Air infiltration is another thing when you live in this climate that we look at carefully.
Yeah, being the MEP person, I can't help but ask those questions. I apologize. Okay, Archie, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So next thing, I think we're almost out of time, so I'm just gonna quickly run through this bit. But basically what I'm gonna do is import the program brief, which we have right here, which is not exactly what it was. I apologize, Danielle, this is just a very rough one, but I'm just quickly going to go into that empty model, which we had again. Let's say we've established our massing. Let's say we know that, okay, this is basically the outline of each floor plate that we want. Now, what are those spaces going to be? What are the interiors going to look like? So what's the spatial programming? So I'm just going to turn off topography here so that you can see the site clearly. And I'm going to click on import. And I'm going to take the CSV, which I just showed you, and drag it over here. So now I've got all these blocks, these spaces, which are as per the labels and the areas that we have here. And I can quickly just start placing them on my site. Go ahead and yeah, don't worry, I'm not gonna do that for all of them. I just wanted to show you that you can do this, and you can also, once you have them up there, edit them. All the ones which have the same label are basically copies of each other. So editing one can edit all of them. And you can also make one unique at any time and edit it individually. At the same time, you also get all your area metrics over here. And You can see that all the spaces have their individual area targets and how much these spaces are. So if I go ahead and click on game room, which is this guy here, and if I start editing the area, you'll see that is this not the game room? Oh, it's the reception desk, yeah. So you can see that I've changed it and it's exceeding the area target right now. So with this, I can quickly go ahead and stack the entire program as 3D blocks, which I've done over here. I'm just going to skip to that.
Hey, Danielle, how did you guys do that on the actual project?
Yeah. So again, working with Renzo Piano, the frameworks were sort of established. The first and second floors we knew were going to be the most public levels. So working with the client as well to sort of determine what wanted to go on those public facing levels. And so we've got a kind of a public facing conference center that happens on both levels 1 and 2. We also have a dedicated art gallery that's on level 2 that faces to the north. So again, gets beautiful daylight, but doesn't get direct light, which is good for the artwork there. So that was our sort of first step, was determining what wanted to be in those primary public spaces, what wanted to go up to the more private levels. And then we spent quite a bit of time determining the specifics of what wanted to be on levels 3 and 4, as far as the various business groups or business entities under the Krause heading or the Krause umbrella. The 6th floor was the easy one because as the pavilion, it sort of always maintained its core function, but the other floors bounced around. The nice thing was on level 1, again, because we were navigating that 17-foot grade differential, we knew most of the back of house spaces were going to get pushed into that hillside, so we were able to actually use that. So all of our back of house spaces, like our storage areas, all of the service entries for the building, even our fitness center, which kind of pulls out to the west, you can kind of see it right there in Architects model. But the locker rooms that went with that, all of those things are sort of lined and pushed into the backside of that hill.
Very cool.
Awesome. So this is where I quickly want to highlight one more thing. You go on story 1. Right now, I've just given these spaces some names as per the program that we imported. And what we can do, which is also a new feature that's been released today, I'm really happy to show you guys, is that you can go to a view and you can turn on all the tags for the different rooms, and they show up with all those areas under each one. And you can actually save them on a sheet and present them as a PDF. So let's say I set this here, set the scale, and I preview it. So this is what my sheet would look like. I could always just zoom in a little bit here so it's more clear, and I can save that sheet.
Yeah, I'm curious, Danielle, how much iteration back and forth during this process did you guys have? Because I would assume, when you're constantly balancing this aesthetic with the function it has to ultimately play, there was a lot. How did you guys manage that?
Yeah, I mean, just short of continuing to say collaboration, we did do a lot of iterations, and this is where the client was involved in this heavily throughout as well, because our program actually was bigger as we started, and we had to talk about what was the most important, what were the priorities to fit in the building. At one point, we were talking about whether or not to include a C-store component that wouldn't obviously have the gas and all those other things, but that would sort of model, I would give them a chance to model in-house how they were thinking about their other convenience stores, since this is the corporate headquarters where they would have all of their managers coming in for training and things like that. Ultimately, we ended up not incorporating that piece of it because these other components rose to the top from a priority standpoint and allowed us to balance how much built space we wanted to have on the site with how much open space we wanted to have on the site. So it really was a lot of showing them different ways of configuring things, and then talking through what are the pros and the cons. What do we give up if we need to incorporate more of this, or if we move something around in the building, versus what do we gain? And I imagine that's very similar to the design process that most architects go through with their clients all the time.
Sure, of course.
And the built to open space ratio is actually 50%, isn't it?
Probably right around there. That's a stat I don't have off the top of my head.
Archie's
That's
done his
amazing.
homework. All right, Arjun, I know we only have 9 minutes left, and I'm sure everybody has a hard stop at the top of the hour. And I want to ask a couple more questions, but I want you to kind of take it away if you need to.
I'm just going to take 2 minutes and show very quickly one cool thing where you can automate this massing model into a building, like a BIM model, let's say, that you can directly export to Revit. So here I've selected external walls to be glass curtain walls, and you can see how with one click it has transformed it into what we say is an LOD 350 model. I'm just going to get rid of the extra terrace slabs over here. And then I'm going to jump in, quickly hide the topography again. I'll delete it actually. And I'm going to export this so that we can import it in Revit.
This is obviously a Snaptrude feature that's been developed post this project, but the idea is that we can take a mass and turn it into actual Revit families that you can use to continue the design process with. And we're seeing that be a big step for sort of tying this early stage conceptual design process with maybe a later stage conceptual design or even early schematic phases. I have a question. We haven't really talked much about this, but this is one of my favorite parts about this project that we talked about previously, is the precision of the project. Being from the construction side, precision is well, it's terrifying a lot of times. But in this case, you had such a high level of precision. Just kind of tell that story, would you?
Yeah. And this is for anyone out there who's been in a Renzo Piano building, they'll know exactly what I'm referencing. But the one we had, it had a strict module, 40 inches, and it shows up everywhere in the building. Everything is aligned and everything works on those modules. But everything was also detailed down to millimeters. I mean, and I say that a 16th and a 32nd of an inch. In order to accomplish that, we had tremendous buy-in from our construction partners and all the way down through all of our sub-trades. The grand opening of this building and the open houses that we had with people, who every single sub-trade bringing in their grandkids and showing off the work that they did and the pride that people took in it. You can't execute a building that's built down to the 32nd of an inch without that kind of buy-in from everybody who's working on the project. But when we were talking about that, that doesn't happen immediately. You look at a general contractor, and when you start talking about building things to a 32nd of an inch tolerance, they look at you like you have a third eye on your forehead. So we had a lot of conversation, and one of my favorite stories was when our site superintendent, we were having a conversation, and he said, most tape measures don't even have a 32nd of an inch measurement. And our principal in charge and project architect, Giorgio Bianchi from Renzo Piano's office, pulled out his tape measure, and he said, well, mine does. And that was kind of the end of that conversation. But yeah, everything in this building, the precision that it was built to and that kind of tolerance was a huge part of the lift. And it really, I think it was pulled off beautifully. So I give tremendous kudos to all of our construction partners, and Ryan Company was the primary general contractor and construction manager who was alongside of us from the get-go. Those were some of the things when we had those early visits with other projects, that they had the opportunity to talk to contractors who were living that at the time and how they were able to execute that. So that was a huge part of getting us across the finish line as well.
I mean, it has to be such a collaborative approach across not just the construction team and the design team, but your client has to be incredible to be able to make it through this process and be extremely happy like they were. And oh, by the way, COVID hit less than 24 months after this thing was occupied, so that changed the world, as we know. But Arch is showing it here now in Revit, which is this is exactly the model that we did in Snaptrude, as we talked earlier. The ability to kind of take this and use the design you had and the concept you had to kind of not have to start from scratch when you go into the Revit environment. I know obviously Snaptrude wasn't involved in this project, but what was the role of technology for, Renzo Piano, OPN, and the construction partners that you guys worked with back then?
Yeah, this was just before the days of BIM 360 hubs. So we were trying to figure out how to share Revit models and who was hosting the Revit model across an ocean and many time zones, because we had partners literally in Italy, Paris, a lot of our consulting partners in New York. And so the one good thing was we joked there was somebody working on this project 24 hours a day, the entirety of the way through it. So there was a pretty fluid handoff because of the time differences, when one team would kind of finish up working on something, let the other team know where it was being left off so they could kind of pick it up and keep moving things forward or respond to work that had been done. But trying to transfer that much information. And really what we ended up doing was creating an open pipeline for tech and for our Revit model to be able to go back and forth between Renzo Piano's office and our OPN office. So our teams were always working in the same model. That was really, really challenging before a BIM 360 hub existed. But we also could not have completed a project like this without Revit and BIM, because we used it extensively for our VDC efforts with our contractors. One of the other unique things about this project was that we not only had engineering partners like for our MEP engineers, but we also had design build partners, and they worked together. They were both at the table through early concept design. Our engineering partner sort of took the lead, and at end of DDs and going into CDs, our design build partners took over the primary authoring of the document. So it essentially eliminated a lot of what we would normally have for doing shops, because we were coordinating with the team that was going to be building it. And it at the time we were doing it, I think for most people seemed like that's a crazy thing to do, but for this kind of a project, it was exactly the right thing to do. And we could not have done that without Revit, because we were creating some Swiss cheese with our very heavy structure to accomplish everything we needed to.
I can imagine. I've been a part of some of those projects. Well, I hope the next time we do this, and the next time we're doing a big showcase on OPN, it's on a brand new Snaptrude project that we're taking advantage of all the collaboration features that we have that would have helped probably pretty significantly in that process. But I want to say thank you so much, Danielle, for being a part of this, and for allowing us to highlight OPN, Renzo Piano, the Krause Gateway Center, and you on our Inspiring Design campaign. Because at the end of the day, you and your team are the ones that really create amazing things, not only in Iowa, but across the world. And we want to highlight that as a company that supports this industry. And, we are, at the end of the day, a large part of our team is made up of architects, and many of them would have preferred to be in my seat to ask you these questions, but I got to be the one, so yay. And no, I just want to thank you and let everybody know. I put in the chat here the link to the showcase model, which is actually live on Snaptrude's webpage, so they can jump into this model and fly around and play around with it however they'd like, and see all the great work that we tried to replicate of what you guys did. And then if you want, you can sign up with Snaptrude there, or sign up for a demo and go from there. So thank you everybody very much for the time. And we are now at the top of the hour. So we'll chat with you soon. Thank you, Danielle. Thank you, Archit.
Thank you.
Thank you.